Hi, my name is Ken Malera. I'm from Socrata. Socrata is a global technology company focused exclusively on accelerating the shift from an open, connected, and data-driven government. With Socrata, governments can use their data to improve citizen engagement, operational efficiency, economic development, and data-driven decision-making. For example, our platform can help federal agencies publish the standardizing spending data required by last year's Data Act quickly and affordably. We believe similar opportunities to deliver better transparency will be created by transformation of federal regulation from disconnected documents into searchable data, the policy change on the agenda for today's summit. We're excited to be a sponsor for today's legislative panel this morning. We're a proud member of the Data Transparency Coalition, and we look forward to working closely with everyone to drive transparency into financial regulation. And now let me introduce the panel. We have Representative Hultgren, Representative Issa, and Representative Maloney. Thanks very much.
A succinct introduction, if there ever was one. Mr. Hultgren, I'm going to move to the table so you can come here for your remarks. We're going to call on our members in alphabetical order, and we're grateful for their participation.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you this morning. My name is Randy Hultgren, Congressman from the 14th Congressional District. It's the western suburbs of Chicago. I serve on the Financial Services Committee, and I also serve on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. So I'm passionate about the intersection of finance and technology, the opportunities that are there, but also some of the pitfalls. Great to be with you. It's certainly an interesting time to be a policymaker in this arena. We've had a devastating financial crisis, far-reaching government response, TARP, Dodd-Frank, and books like Michael Lewis's Flash Boys. In this environment, it could be tempting to follow the populist lead and declare that the U.S. economy and the market systems are rigged. My constituents certainly are worried, but as the SEC Chair White says, the markets are not rigged, and I absolutely agree with her. However, the financial system depends upon smart regulations to maintain investor confidence and also to prevent systemic risk, and consumers need some protection. As we saw in 2008, this industry directly impacts Main Street, and few in my district would invest without some fraud protection. Many people take the easy route and largely blame the free market for the problems we've had. They would love to roll back the clock to a simpler time when trading was routed through a few places and investors only had to understand a limited number of products and order types. For them, every financial problem must have a regulatory solution. Or to borrow a popular saying, if you only have a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. Well, who's pounding the nails? Washington. Hayek called this the fatal conceit, the idea that enough smart people in Washington can centrally plan a system to completely eliminate risk. We all know that's not true. More regulations, even ones coming out of Washington, can be an answer sometimes. But I believe the answer more often is to make regulations smarter and simpler, more efficient, less confusing. The task of policymakers is to implement a smart system that regulates effectively where it's needed and stay out where it's not. Free markets don't always work, but what's worse is when we don't have a free market at all. Free markets function best with perfect information, but we all know investors, traders, and businesses have far less than that now. So we'd be wise to consider regulation that moves us closer towards the ideal, towards a system that provides protection for consumers and punishes illegal activity. I came to this conference because I believe that when properly implemented, structure and transparent data can make the free market function better and move us towards smart regulations as our goal. In our nation's capital, too many take the short-term mindset, only considering how to make it past the next election cycle. This makes it difficult to find innovative, long-term solutions to problems. As a result, Congress can't seem to take on the big challenges like entitlement reform, spending restraint, and health care. This is also true with financial regulations. Policymakers must find ways to instill faith in our system by effectively policing fraud and corruption without unnecessarily burdening financial institutions and their consumers. I believe that moving towards transparent and structured data can offer many benefits to companies, government agencies, and investors. First, companies would benefit from structured data because it can allow for automated regulatory compliance. According to consulting firm Gartner, Inc., an average Fortune 1000 company uses 800 spreadsheets to comply with regulations. Structured data reduces that paperwork burden by streamlining regulatory compliance while still improving the accuracy of their reports. Tasks that previously took months could only take weeks or days. Businesses in my district could reduce their costs by incorporating XBRL into other processes such as business operations, internal financial reporting, external financial reporting, investment lending regulations, and economic policy making. We've already seen how this works in the context of FDIC call reports. All U.S. regulated banks must file a call report, a supervisory tool that provides extensive information about a bank's financial condition and operations. When regulators required XBRL for call reports, error rates in reports were reduced from 1/3 to 0, and preparation time was reduced from weeks to often days. In my Northern Illinois district, this freed up resources that community banks could spend on serving customers instead of answering to government bureaucrats. Elsewhere, Australia's standard business reporting regime requires several Australian regulators to adopt consistent data formats so that their companies can report all of their information at once instead of multiple times across agencies. This could save Australian businesses up to $735 million annually and reduce how much data that businesses must track by 71%. We could see the same results in my district and across this country as businesses find that reduced costs help them hire new workers or reduce their prices. Now, what about these regulators? We cannot design regulations that remove the possibility of risk from our system, nor should we trust regulators to micromanage our economy. However, by increasing transparency, structured data can help regulators root out fraud and abuse. For example, the FDIC's transition to XBRL in call reports improved the analytical abilities of regulators by as much as 20%. This will help regulators better understand the information they have. For example, the SEC will be able to data mine registrants' filings and identify potential areas of risk. Regulators could more precisely identify companies for further review and free their resources to focus on the truly fraudulent instead of casting a broader, costlier net. How could regulators have used this improved analytical ability during the financial crisis? Most believe that a meaningful portion of the financial crisis occurred because the market was so incomprehensible, even for the savviest of market participants. For example, neither financial regulators nor market participants could evaluate how the collapse of Lehman Brothers would affect them, so they panicked. While Lehman had thousands of pages of regulatory filings, there was no simple way to search what was actually in the documents. In other contexts, regulators have failed to find major scandals such as the Bernie Madoff fraud or the WorldCom or Enron debacles. These regulators and regulatory failures have real consequences on hardworking Americans. We have to recognize that. Lives were destroyed, jobs disappeared, and savings were lost. Data transparency could at least reduce the damage of these types of crises, even if it can't prevent them all from happening. Finally, structured, transparent data provides significant benefits for investors across the country once the error rate of structured data improves. The financial crisis dealt a significant blow to how much trust the average American places in investing. So we've heard many of the benefits of structured data. I also believe there are a few things that we can do to advance this vision with policymakers. First, we need to understand that those who oppose structured and transparent data have an important perspective. Many see transparency as an additional regulatory cost, which comes during a time of increased regulatory burdens. Complying with Dodd-Frank alone will require companies to expend 60 million labor hours and employ 30,000 workers to navigate the bureaucracy. I consistently hear how difficult the regulatory environment has made it for my constituents to buy a home, start a small business, or expand their operations. So we have to do this in a way that is not adding additional cost for them, that can be done in a timely manner, and something that they can accomplish and feel good about. And that's what I want to close with, is the challenge that we have from all of you is that we have to convince those who will be using this that it ultimately can be beneficial to them. We need a paradigm shift of seeing that this isn't just an additional burden on them, but will be something that will allow their companies to be more cost effective, for them to be able to serve their customers better, and for them also to be able to increase wages. These are important ideas for them that need to sell among policymakers, clearly, but also among small and medium-sized financial firms and others as well. So I want to thank you for what you're doing here today. This is incredibly important. I have to apologize. I'd committed to another speech this morning, so I have to leave now, but I will be following up with my colleagues who I greatly respect and really look up to as mentors of mine, Congresswoman Maloney and Congressman Issa. And so thank you again for allowing me to be here. I continue to learn from all of you and want to do what's right, certainly for our markets, but also for the companies that we serve as well. So I hope you have a great day. Thank you.
I'm excited to call next, proceeding in alphabetical order, on Congressman Darrell Issa. Thank you for being here, Mr. Issa.
Well, as Randy heads for the door, I just want to make sure I don't fail to say I don't think we're mentoring him for a just arrived member. He's hit the ground running. He understands the issues. He's done a really good job of getting to the core of both why we have to implement properly so it isn't a burden, and then what the benefits are. So, Randy, thank you so much. You're way ahead of some of those old Luddites we serve with, all of whom will remain nameless. I one time mentioned one person who still had a typewriter in his office. I got a call from 8 of my colleagues. And I know there were more with typewriters than that, each saying that an IBM Selectrix correcting 2 was one of the great achievements of all time. Oddly enough, the member from Lexington, Kentucky didn't have one where it was made. But that tone that you just heard my colleague set is the right tone for financial reporting, but it's also the right tone for open and transparent government. Now, no question at all, I'm here to break a little news. Randy mentioned Bernie Madoff. I don't know why that name keeps coming up, along with WorldCom and so on. But it is in fact a lesson learned but not yet set to prevent. Under Dodd-Frank, we increased by huge amounts the reach of the federal government to protect the American people, and yet each and every one of the data transparency requirements there, many of which were more about not government knowing about us, but us knowing about our government, when it left the House in conference were, for whatever reason, not accepted by the Senate. So in the days to come, I will be, on a bipartisan basis, submitting a bill that, I'll give you the long name. You don't need to write it down. The short name will work. The Making All Data Open for Financial Transparency Act, or Madoff for short. Bernie Madoff and his family, may they spend long and many hours thinking about how they manipulated and lied. That's not our problem anymore. Our problem, in order to take financial, the ability of America to raise capital to the next level, and for investors to be confident that their money is at least secure if there's a promise of money security, or where there is, we need to learn from that mistake. And that's the goal of the Making All Data Open for Financial Transparency Act. You can see why Madoff just works. But the reality is the tools are at hand. We have to get them implemented. And I just want you to leave with a couple of points, and I know we have European colleagues with us here today. America virtually invented the idea of financial reporting. America virtually led in the data world. We certainly led in computer innovation. But the Europeans, and I said this earlier for my colleagues, perhaps jealous that capital is easier to get here, particularly early capital, angel capital, and early investment, have taken what we've done, and they're ahead of us in implementing it, because they see the absolute virtue of, in fact, reporting once, reporting in a way that is searchable, that data being usable. And we're behind. And some of that is Congress's fault, some of it's the regulator's fault, and as Randy said, some are emerging small businesses who do not yet appreciate that the phenomenal capital markets that exist here, the access to funds, are in fact the benefit of transparency. So often when they say, well, I kind of like transparency, but I can't afford it, what they're really saying is that transparency is something for other people so that I have access to capital, but I don't want to be burdened with it, or I don't want to be burdened with it yet. The fact is that if every single company and public company and public debt, or publicly traded debt, and in fact, things as simple as your bank reporting the underlying information about your home mortgage were available when needed appropriately, then the 2008 collapse would not have happened the way it did. As Randy said in his opening statements, those markets froze, and they froze not because the house at 3637 Annisdale in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Yes, that was one of the homes I was in growing up, and we'll never forget those addresses. It had a mortgage, and the mortgage was a fraction of what the home was worth. But nobody knew that it was mixed in with others where, in fact, the home or building may have been worth a fraction of what was owed. The reality is the post-crisis, as things unwound, the underlying assets involved in the meltdown have ended up being essentially par or above the debt on a balanced basis. Had we been able to get that in real time, America would have been mostly not participating in a meltdown. Had the Irish had it, Ireland would have suffered less, and so on. There will always be bad actors, and there will always be times in which the money in the till isn't what it's supposed to be, and that's one of the reasons for reporting. My chief of staff is much smarter than I am. That's why I hired him 14 years ago and keep him. And he's particularly smarter because he's able to get to the core of why we do things. Transparency in government, those filings in a way that are machine readable, interoperably mergeable with strong metadata, many in this room will understand it's so the government knows more about what you're doing. But since 9/11, the government has known a lot more about what you're doing, while you have known a lot less about what they're doing. And data transparency goes both ways. If we do our job right, yes, more information will be available to the government. More information will be available to the investment community. More information will be available to those who we charge to do analysis to help us live our lives better, make better decisions, make better investments. But most importantly, that quip of my chief of staff, we will know more about what our government is doing. And that is every bit as important, perhaps more important in any democracy, is for the American people to have the ability to know what their government is doing. And that includes where they're using the data they're getting. Today, most data analyzed on behalf of even reporting companies the analysis remains unavailable to us. We don't know what they know. We need to know what they know. I want to thank the FDIC for helping lead that level of transparency. As we were moving the Data Act, the fact is we cited the FDIC repeatedly for being ahead of the game in the banking regulatory business. I want to thank the Security Exchange Commission for the fact that they have embraced and are doing everything they can under the legislation. And lastly, and I know we're going to have a little panel discussion, but I want to thank the administration. Without Vice President Biden, getting the Data Act passed would have probably been doubly hard and perhaps not happened in the Congress that it did. Without the President's commitment to open and transparent government and setting up, both through executive order and through his agency construction, setting up the grounds in which I'm confident that on his watch we will see many of the points of the Data Act complied with, and implemented, this wouldn't be possible. For America to catch up to many other parts of the world, I didn't mention Singapore and many of the other countries that did it, for us to catch up, for our innovation, our actual execution to equal our innovation, we need all partners pulling together. I believe we have that. I know, Hudson, the people here today, I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm optimistic that in the next 2 years, we're going to see most, if not all, of the major elements of the Data Act implemented, and with, God willing, the Madoff tag-alongs being added to it. So thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Issa. We're excited next to call on one of the strongest supporters of structured data reporting on the House Financial Services Committee. Ms. Maloney, thanks for being here.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I think this is a tremendously important conference. I serve as the ranking member on the Capital Markets Committee on Financial Services, and also on the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, which is focused on transparency and accountability in government, and am ranking on the Joint Economic Committee. I am also one of a few members of the committee who voted against a bill that would have rolled back the XBRL. So I am already on record in support of the XBRL, and I believe it's good for the economy, good for business, good for oversight, good for everything, and it's something we should support and work very hard to implement. I want to thank the coalition for bringing us together. I already have several meetings set up to follow up on things, and I was talking to one regulator right after our conference that we had in the other room, and he was telling me about when the financial crisis hit, all the top regulators were in a room, and they didn't have any data. They didn't know where it came from, how to stop it, what the exposure was, and out of that came this focus that we're seeing throughout government, not only for transparency, but reliable data. If you don't have good data, you can't make good decisions. And I am very proud of the work that I did along with Congressman Issa and others on the Dodd-Frank bill, and Senator Reid, which focused on creating an Office of Financial Regulation, where we can start to bring these data elements together. I also have a project ongoing right now with the General Accounting Office, which does research for us in Congress in a bipartisan way on who's collecting what data where, and how can we streamline it and bring it all together. What I hear from my constituents is, I have too much paperwork. I have to give the same data here, same data there. It's expensive. The numbers they throw at me on how much they have to spend on regulation is just overpowering. If we can send a man to the moon, why in the world can't we figure out data elements and computerize it and make it simple for companies and for government to look at it? I think the story of the financial crisis, one hearing that stands out in my memory was on AIG, and it shows how out of control everything was. They come in and they testify they need $50 million to keep them going. The next week, they're in for $100 million. The next week, it's another $180 million. This keeps going until we get to $185 billion to help restructure them and bail them out. And then they had to hire the guy who created the mess. Can you imagine? Created the huge mess. They then hired him to unravel the mess. No one understood anything of what was happening. And so this whole area is trying to bring, borrowing costs down, cost of capital down, and improve liquidity. So I think it's very important. Now, on the Financial Services Committee, we spend a great deal of time talking about how to improve access to capital. Well, that's exactly what XBRL can do and help businesses. They can do this by making it possible for investors and analysts to very quickly download standardized financial statements for an entire industry and immediately start making cross-company comparisons in order to identify the best performers. This will enable investors to more easily identify the companies that are so-called diamonds in the rough, the next Apple, the next Twitter, the next whatever. And very often these are small companies that have very innovative business models. Right now, these small companies have trouble attracting the attention of analysts and institutional investors. This is a fundamental fact, and we spend a great deal of time on the Financial Services Committee trying to figure out why this is. Well, one reason is it's simply too time-consuming for analysts, investors, regulators, or anyone to pick through every small company's 100-page financial filings. Economists call these costs search costs, and unfortunately, they still dramatically outweigh the benefits. A small company's filing may tell a fantastic story about why this company is poised to be the next Apple, but if the search costs are so high that analysts and investors never see them, that company will never get the capital infusion that it needs to grow, and our economy will never realize the benefits that the company has to offer. This is where XBRL comes in. It dramatically reduces the search costs by making it fast and cheap for investors to gather standardized financial statements for entire industries, including the small companies that the investor wouldn't have bothered with before, wouldn't have had the time to search for. If these small companies offer greater value than the bigger, more established companies in the industry, then it will likely be obvious to the investor when she looks at the data. This will result in capital flowing more efficiently, not to the biggest and most well-known companies, but the companies that can use that capital in the most efficient way. This also allows investors to spend more time analyzing data and less time gathering data. It is a win-win-win in all directions. But it's important to remember that if those small companies don't file their financial information in XBRL format, then their financial statements won't be part of the investor's data set. See, this is in the interest of small businesses. This is a helpful tool to them. This is a great idea for them, and it is a great idea to support innovation in our country. This is how XBRL can help improve small companies' access to capital. I think we should be moving forward, not backward, on XBRL. That's why I voted against a bill in the last Congress that would have rolled back the XBRL requirements for far too many companies, even though the bill was sponsored by some of my best friends in Congress. And they were saying, why are you voting against us? I'm not voting against you. I'm voting against what you're doing. I'm optimistic that we can make some good progress in XBRL in this Congress. However, after all, expanding the use of XBRL is probably the most free market way to improve small businesses' access to capital. It doesn't involve the government putting its thumb on the scale in favor of one business over another or using taxpayer money to finance small businesses either directly or indirectly. Instead, expanding the use of XBRL enables investors to decide where to put their money. And I might add that we are behind other industrialized countries. They have moved to this format. We need to move to it too. Unfortunately, right now, small companies are at a structural disadvantage to large companies in the competition for investors' attention. Expanding the use of XBRL can help level the playing field for small companies, enable higher returns for investors, and make our overall economy more efficient. To me, this is a no-brainer. This should be a focus of government, of business, of regulators. I want to be part of the team. I want to be part of the solution. I want to close by saying, and I'm going to have to leave because we have a hearing, literally, with Mary Jo White testifying, and I have tried to set up a meeting with her beforehand for 5 minutes, and I don't want to miss it. So I'm going to have to run, and I'm going to tell her how about this important conference and to make it a priority. But just this last week, we had a speech by Jack Lew, the Secretary of the Treasury, and he was talking about the economic indicators, and we've had 60 straight months of job growth, and he had this chart that compared where our economy was to the rest of the world. And we have grown, our economy has improved faster than Japan and other countries. But in any event, he was asked, why do you think this is? And he gave the standard, innovation, the great American spirit, the private sector. But he had another that I thought was very interesting, because we always hear about the do-nothing Congress. He said that the amount of initiatives that the American government, with its people, put forward was like 10 times more than the rest of the world combined. We didn't stop. We've got a bad economy. What are we going to do next? Let's try this. If it didn't work, we stopped. Let's try that. Let's try this. Let's try that. We kept trying different ways to get us moving again. And I thought that was very interesting. And I think one of the great things about our country is that we're just not afraid to take a chance, even if we fail. Let's take that chance, see if it works. And I think the XBRL is going to let us take facts and numbers. Numbers don't lie. And put the numbers and the facts in a way that investors, analysts, and regulators can work with us to help us grow this economy and continue to be the strongest or one of the strongest economies in the world, where so many people want to come to live, where so many people want to invest. I was at a hearing the other day with the State Department, and they always complain in their budget that they don't have enough money to process the visas of everyone who wants to come to America. And I couldn't help but think, isn't that a good problem to have? Isn't that a good problem to have? Well, you're a big part of that solution. Thank you for inspiring me today. I am on your team. Let's make it happen. Let's become more efficient. And we have to educate small businesses that this is a helpful tool for them. If they've got the best idea in the world, what better way to get it out than with a good standardized system that helps analysts and investors see that they are the promise of the future. So thank you for being part of the promise of the future of our great country. And thank you. I'm going to be thinking about you all day. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ms. Maloney. Our original plan was to have a panel and questions, but we've got one member of Congress standing, and so I'm going to call Mr. Issa back to the podium. I've got one question that I'll ask him, and then after that, we're going to open it up to audience questions. We'll probably have too many, but we'll start working on that. Mr. Issa, why don't you take the podium back again? And I've got one prepared question after which I'll throw it open.
The good news is, since 3 for 3 all said they support transparency, and Carolyn's been a champion on this, I'll try to answer consistent with our agreement, which is unusual in Congress. Obviously, what I tip to all of you today, that the upcoming codename Madoff bill, it's really about what Barney Frank said yes to in conference. It was in the House bill. It died on the Senate conferee side. The reality is it's not controversial, but it's overdue to get done. It's sort of the last part of Dodd-Frank, which is government wants to do to you. Why not have them show what they know so they can do something for you? It's that simple. If you can spread that word that Darrell, Issa, and Barney Frank agreed on this, it's, clearly those who remember Barney know we must have covered the two ends of the spectrum. But if you have some questions out there, or I always take sage advice. That's, true of, well, okay, so it's not that true of congressmen, but in this case I will. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, sir. Lisa Garcia, FOIA Resource Center. So do you see the application of standard business reporting language across other sectors, not just the financial? And can you tell us a little bit more about your Internet of Things caucus, if it's not too far afield?
Well, it's not too far afield. It's a bit. The first half of the question is the Data Act is not about financial reporting. It's about government having their data available so that both internally and externally it's machine readable, searchable, and the ultimate benefit when we were passing the bill is fairly easy. We talked about when you make data available in a usable format natively, you get things like Any of you, how many of you have used the apps to know where your airplane is and whether it's on time? Okay, cool app. And now you're getting it, you're not getting it from an airline when they're telling you that you're on time and you look at the empty gate and know that the damn thing ain't there. You're getting it directly from the source, and so it's much more accurate data. I think everyone here that has an iPhone or any other smart Android, other smart phone, the first thing you load on it is the weather, right? You get your time and weather. That weather is in fact simply government data that at one time you had to turn on Channel 3 and have the weatherman tell you what the government had determined was the forecast. Now you have it online. Imagine if you merge all of that with thousands of other databases, what the, if you will, the aggregators can do for you in predictive and responsive answers to your question. You know, I always say that the Data Act intends to take what you might call a Google search, where up comes 35,000 answers to the question that you've typed in there or the name you've typed in there. The difference is if we have data that across platform can be viewed with strong metadata links so that systems know what each of those mean, then in fact, instead of 35,000 answers, you get the one answer that's the result of the 35,000 hits on Google search. That's 4,000 of which are absolutely useless. And that's what we're trying to do. In the case of the Internet of Things, in a sense, it's going to add 500 billion new points of information. And if our country is smart, and if, for example, every single outdoor weather piece that might, the sensor might actually be part simply of a internet-connected front door light. If it knows the temperature and you don't care if that information's made available, then we could know what the various microclimates are at 1 billion places in the United States. In the case of the Internet of Things, we look above us and we see these lights, and we can all have a question about, you know, should these lights be on or off? But imagine that in a connected society, every single light would be able to sense the available ambient light and go up or down to meet a preset. We turned it on, we want it this bright, and now all day and all night, if the room's occupied, these things are going to go up or down. And this side of the room, if it's slightly shaded, is going to be slightly brighter, and this side slightly less. And then if, in a smart grid world, these devices find out that, in fact, we have a shortage coming, they could turn down even a little more. All of that is about the benefit of connectivity. It's information going out that may or may not be available to you depending upon the wishes of the owner of the information, but in most cases it's harmless information. The temperature at my front door is not proprietary. I would be happy if every device was able to tell somebody what the temperature, you know, in a particular device area was. And we don't think about it, but imagine this. Imagine that I fly, I'm a farmer, and I fly a drone, and this is very Amazon-ish, but I fly a drone over my acreage, and it analyzes what the conditions are of my crop. Now let's just say for a moment, I'm going to use that because I'm going to spray pesticide here and I'm going to irrigate here. But if I don't mind that data being public, and in most cases, it's not terribly proprietary, I got what I needed out of it. Well, now I have a current image of my entire farm. I have temperature readings, I have pesticide levels. Imagine that information is open and available in a common format. Now, we can all say, oh God, this is ridiculous, that's too much data. When I started as a Army computer systems person in the 1970s, we had a 2400 baud conditioned modem that was costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to maintain over a 70-mile distance. Conditioned line, don't laugh, that was fast. They hadn't yet named the internet. Al Gore hadn't gotten around to it, but we were using it. That's always good for a laugh. Poor bastard. Tried You know, his dad did the superhighway system with Eisenhower, and all he wanted to do was get credit for championing something that needed championed. So I've got a little sympathy for him. Only a little, but I've got a little. But we also had $10 million worth of disk drives, Digital Corporation System, DEC as it was known. These RPO6s, each one for $100,000, had 6 meg of data. Now you can laugh. So the idea that we could analyze these countless petabytes of data and make them available is there. The Internet of Things simply says, let's make sure government doesn't get in the way of that, that to the extent that privacy and your personal control need to be maintained, we want to make sure we facilitate it. But at the same time, I think we all know that Moore's Law is not even at its half-life, and that the ability to have that level of disparate data be analyzed and available is there. But today, we're simply talking about getting off PDFs and paper, and that's sort of the symbolism of my connected, you know, I mean, if I want to know what the temperature of my house is, I pull my iPhone out, and I've got 2 separate thermostats, and I can not only see it, but I can change it. I can also change the one in California. And yet government hasn't figured out how to simply say, take your digital data and deliver it to us as digital. They're still saying, well, fill out our form. And in some cases, you can even go online and fill out our form. But in few cases are you really getting meaningful information. So thank you for those 2 questions. I love talking about the Internet of Things.
We've got time for a couple more questions.
Drew Doggett, writer at Meritalk. All 3 of you have spoken at length about obsolete practices and typewriters and legacy systems, old repositories.
I was the only one that cited Luddites.
Luddites, for sure. What is the role of Congress for both financial institutions and federal agencies to, how do you serve as a catalyst to expedite the process into new technologies such as virtualization, the cloud, and other new technologies?
You know, Hudson he was a good staffer some many years ago. He said, you force them. The fact is, we need to make government do its job, and we have mandates. And our mandates are reasonable and measured to promote commerce, the common good. And to the extent that forcing government agencies to modernize aids our capital markets, reduces the actual cost of providing services, we need to push on that. We have the Office Management Budget here with a number of other federal parts of the government that are here that get it and that are pushing on it. You know, the most important thing that a doctor says that he or she must do is no harm. So the other half of that is that a lot of what government has to do is say, look, what is it we must do? And how do we make sure we do the minimum harm to the extent that some of the things we must do can potentially have side effects, usually cost, but not always. So I think that's a balancing act, and Congress has to be a major tool in that balancing, not because the president doesn't have a role, but because the president's not a sustaining body. The presidency is embodied in one person for 4 or 8 years. Well, Congress is a body that has absolute forever continuity, and we can sort of start a project, and decades later, some of the same members and others can continue it. And I think when it comes to overseeing regulatory agencies, that's a classic example where agencies' failure to do something, they can outlast a director of the Office of Management and Budget, but they can't outlast Congress.
Let's do 1 or 2 more questions, maybe one from the other side of the room.
Lady in the back with her hand up, if we can get a mic to you. Or give the mic there, and then we'll get it to her.
That one and then that one.
And the power of the mic clearly is there. Yes, sir.
I work with local government financial data to analyze municipal bonds, and there are 18,000 governments that file audited financial statements every year. It's all on PDF. Congress has done a great job with migrating company data to XBRL. How about local government and state government data?
Well, I mean, that's a good example where partially we can lead the horse to water. Partially, you know, if states are perfectly willing to have their bonds trade at a slight disadvantage because the information is less open and transparent, they may get to still do that. But the reality is I don't expect it to last long. I think the whole idea that, yeah, that you're going to have PDFs with offerings, even in something as simple as a bond, is going to go away quickly, particularly, and here's the real answer, you got to be a fool, an absolute fool, to buy a municipal bond from any entity that doesn't want to keep you continuously posted on the performance of, let's say, Chicago. We'll use them as an example. What is your debt ratio? Where are you going to be? I don't want to have to look at the news every night to decide whether to sell my Illinois bonds. And I certainly don't want to look at the news every night and hope that my mutual fund component in there, how much of it is a particular bond that could in fact become worth less or nothing. So I see that as a transition. I also see that as perhaps debt in that sense to be on the tail end, where equity analysis is on the leading edge. And I hope that answers your question, but I suspect you're going to see it almost as quickly. Did we
Another
get
question?
to the
Yes.
lady over there?
Yes, hello. Angela Ray, Grove House Consulting. A piece of sage advice that from someone all of us will recognize. Jack Welch, the now retired chair of GE, made a comment 15 years ago that all data, especially financial data, should be searchable, sortable, and reportable. So there were many sage individuals out there touting this initiative. My question to you, Representative.
By the way, if you think he's retired, he just spoke at South by Southwest. He has more active life than probably anyone in this room, and a significant staff here in Washington, plus a graduate program that bears his name and challenge. So that man is not retired. He simply doesn't work at GE anymore.
Fair enough, fair enough. My question is, in the initiative to move from documents to data, we also have to keep in mind, if we do abandon the documents approach, we have the issue of the General Accountability Office has cited the high level of financial illiteracy in the United States. So if we're moving to a system that is data-driven, we're going to force citizens to move to systems that can present that data. So we've got an issue of making making information less viewable to the average citizen, and coupled with their inability to absorb and understand that data. So how do we bring those two issues together? Financial illiteracy and moving from documents to data. Thank you.
Oi. Well, first of all, I don't think you're going to teach the public how to read a 10K properly. And you certainly aren't going to teach the public how to drill down and find the 22% of profit, of EBIT, that's hidden in one line item, or the reserve funds and whether they're shrinking or increasing, and how much of it was left over from the last reorganization that they're metering out in order to smooth their P&L. A lot of that you can't plan on teaching. What we can do is make the internet world one in which when someone says, I want to look at a company, and then once they're looking at a presentation, we'll just use hypothetically Google as the new Google Presents product that comes out as a beta. What? One more, sorry. Yeah, that comes out, as a beta day after tomorrow because they heard this thing today and said, oh yeah, we can do that. And then, unlike a 10K, you say, well, now I want to know the comparative of its peers in the industry, and you click, and suddenly it's overlaid in a way that has been tested as being easy to read. Is that better than trying to learn exactly how a 10K looks and then trying to analyze it? You bet you. Because the 10K was a stodgy, or 10Q, or any other of the documents, is a stodgy form versus Microsoft and Yahoo and Google competing for presenting you the same data in a better format that makes you want to go to their page. That competition that you get from data is so much better than 3 different places to click and download a PDF that although consistently doesn't give you the same level. So I would be the counterbalance on that and say, you know, I'm not sure that we can teach people how to read the forms, but we can certainly challenge the private sector to compete for people's eyes by presenting better and better the same data, or, you know, obviously the same data, but presenting it in a way that is more interesting and available, thus getting the consumer to their site, which has been the story of the internet. I can take one more, I'm told. I'm not being the last to call. You call on the last person.
One more. Roy Warden, how about you in the center there?
We'll finish with an international tone.
Thank you, Hudson. I'm Roy Warden from the United Kingdom, and I flew in yesterday to be with you here today. When I got to Dulles Airport, I was handed a piece of paper by a very polite chap in a uniform, and I had to fill in my name, my passport number, when I was last on a FAR, and how many dollars I was bringing in with me. And then I handed this bit of paper back to the chap. Is there anybody in this room who can tell me what is happening to that bit of paper, please?
Well, since you were not selected for having falsely stated that you had less than $10,000 and patted down everywhere, we may never know. I came in day before yesterday. I came in on Sunday, and I put my passport onto the global entry, put my fingers down on the other side, looked into the screen, out came a piece of paper with my picture, a verification. And I touched on the screen the answers to the same questions that you were asked, including I hadn't been on a farm, hadn't stepped in pig shit or anything, and I'd managed. I was in Brussels, so you never know. I did have some really good pork while I was there, but the fact is I answered those same questions quickly online at a kiosk. It came out on a piece of paper that for some stupid reason I walked over and handed to the person, and I know they had no reason to look at it because it was all in the computer. We are transitioning in the United States from that stupid piece of paper, as is the rest of the world. The European Union has obviously done one good thing, which is 28 countries do not do that between each other, and it makes it easier. Very clearly, we have to get to a kiosk world, and we have to get to that because then you do have meaningful data. The fact is that piece of paper, once you didn't get a secondary, that piece of paper was a am I lying piece of paper, because unless they checked you right there, they were never going to know or care, and that was the end of it. The difference now with my global entry is that data was captured, at least among people who are in that category of signed up for global entry. They do know how many of us do or don't carry more than $10,000 in cash. They do know how many of us didn't visit places and so on. And by the way, they also could easily say, based on your answers or a random, go here, and the rest of you do what I did, which was I was through customs in total. I was outside from the time I got off that awful little truck they make you come over to customs in. How many of you come back on that 1950s thing? And they have a recording that tells you, for your convenience, we're giving you this. But from the time I came out of that to the time I was getting in my car was 3 minutes. So that is the best example of you were under a system that created no meaningful data but used paper. I went through the same checkpoints, but in a system that is so much better, so much automated, and quite frankly, safer. Because my passport did not show this unshaven look, but it didn't matter because my fingerprints hadn't changed, so it was a very quick, automatic, no looking at this, which, by the way, while I was in Europe, they were looking and going, you look better without the beard. I want to thank you all for inviting me back, Hudson, for inviting me back a second year.